Hello and welcome to the Amargi Mosaic. We're so glad you've joined us today. I'm Elbashir, writer, editor, translator, and your host. At the Amargi Mosaic, we're piecing together conversations from Kurdistan and the Middle East, bringing you stories and insights you might not hear elsewhere. We're a grassroots-funded media collective powered by journalists and academics who believe in independent voices, not corporate agendas. So whether you're here to learn, stay informed, or simply curious about the region, you're in the right place. Before we dive in, don't forget to follow us at theamargi.com and all the social media platforms you see on your screen. Your support helps us grow and keep these conversations alive. Today, we're going to be discussing a place and a subject that is described by many as the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. There's been at least 12 million, some figures are suggesting 14 million people displaced, and the massacres and the atrocities, probably we would not even be able to cover them all. Where we're talking about is Sudan, a country in the east of Africa, and we're specifically going to speak a little bit about a place in Sudan, in Darfur, which is in around the southwest of the country, specifically Elbashir. Now, many people may know Sudan is one of the cradles of humanity, and also throughout history, being on the Red Sea has been a crucial trade route historically, and actually has been a very important site of world making, and some could say for better or for worse. Sudan has also been the site of many kingdoms, occupations, and also struggles for liberation. I'm really excited to have Elbashir Idris with me today. Elbashir, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
So you're a Sudan-focused humanitarian and analyst based in Cardiff, who has been at the forefront of documenting Sudan's crisis. You witnessed and recorded the revolution and coup, coordinated evacuations in 2023, and have delivered aid through Port Sudan whilst tracking the war economy and external sponsorship fueling this conflict. As a regular analyst on Al Jazeera, DW, BBC, and TRT, you've been a crucial voice for civilian protection and accountability. Your documentation from revolution to war, combined with your humanitarian work, gives you unique insights into the catastrophe currently unfolding. So, Elbashir, you documented both, or you were definitely engaged in both the December 2018-2019 revolution, the subsequent coup, and also many of the things that have happened after as well. So from 2021, 23 onwards. Now we're witnessing horrific scenes from Elbashir in Darfur, as we said, in the southwest of Sudan, with the RSF, formerly known as the Janjaweed, responsible for the 2003 genocide, conducting what many call ethnic cleansing of non-Arab Sudanese. Having documented many of this trajectory, can you walk us through how Sudan went from revolutionary hope to this nightmare? How did the Janjaweed successfully rebrand or rehabilitate its image as the RSF and gain quite a level of international legitimacy? We've seen videos of RSF officials in Washington, D.C., and so on. And what's the reality in Elbashir that needs urgent attention?
Well, first and foremost, good morning, Elif, and thank you for having me. So to answer these questions, we need to go back a bit and understand how the Janjaweed was formed, under what government it was formed, and the policies during the era of those times. So let me take you back a bit. Let me take you to the 1970s, actually. During then, Sudan. Actually, since independence, Sudan gained independence in 1956. Sudan has been ruled mostly a majority of its time by autocratic regimes and military dictators. And during the 70s, we had a person, and 80s, we had a person named Nemeri, General Nemeri, who was essentially a military man who would repackage the government in terms of different ideologies. So one time he was a communist, socialist, even though he didn't act the part. And then the other time he switched over to an Islamist kind of role. And that is due to the multiple kind of factions within Sudan of the different ideologies there. But the biggest one that definitely had a control all over the country wasn't even Sudanese. It's one that many countries in the developing world are very familiar with, and that is the IMF and the World Bank and neoliberal policies, which essentially seek to resource extract whilst diminishing the functionalities of the state. And essentially, what happened was these IMF loans were being taken by these generals who kept on ruling Sudan, and they weren't able to borrow it back, and all these pay it back, and all these different conditionalities that came with it basically made whoever was in charge set up some sort of security apparatus to keep everything under control as they did the bidding of the international order. The reason why a lot of humanity, I would say, gets to enjoy its emulsifier, stabilizer, and all these kind of things that they see in all products, regardless of brands, is because Sudan is the world's biggest producer of gum Arabic. And because of that, you find that in every single product you can possibly imagine. But to get that resource extraction, you have to have I'm going to put quote, the farm under subjugation and the people under a poor rule, so you can extract as much. And so the same goes within, and Sudan has many revolutions, actually, well, three main ones, and where they managed to dispose of the ruler. And after first there was a revolution against a general named Aboud in the 50s, 60s. General Aboud, who he did a coup against the civilian government. The first civilian government of Sudan, so the people got rid of him after he came into power. Then came Nimeri, and then the people got rid of him again when they did a revolution. And all these revolutions have been peaceful and without weapons. And then after Nimeri went, came in a man named Sadiq al-Mahdi, who was 27 years old when he became the prime minister of Sudan. But it was a very short-lived moment, as during that time, though he was democratically elected, he was then overthrown by Omar Hassan al-Bashir, the one who had the 30-year regime of Sudan. Now, let me come back to Sadiq al-Mahdi. What happened in the 80s was there was an actual arming of those tribes in Darfur, those Arab tribes in Darfur. Weapons were being given to them by the Mahdi government. And even though that is democratic and secular, and it's a completely different way of thinking, weapons and arms were still being sent over there. And so that started to see the formation of the militias and formation of these groups of people who wanted to protect their homeland or their area, because they saw the conflict brewing over there was the farmers and pastoralists versus the herders and those who were moving with their cattle. So you had different tribes and groups of people who would be nomadic, and they would move with their herd, so they will be able to get resources, or rather their animals would eat the grass and eat the land. And then you have the farmers who was growing that land. And of course there was going to be a clash between the two, because one would say, hey, this is mine, don't come over here. And the other one would say, well, these are my animals, they went over there, how am I going to control them? So back and forth, and then it got violent and it got ugly. And essentially it became land possession and dispossession. Now that was in the 80s. Now let's fast forward a bit. Omar Hassan al-Bashir comes in, he does a bloodless coup on the 30th of June, 1989, and he takes over the government. From there, he immediately sweeps to install his security apparatus, enlarging it, whilst also following IMF or World Bank conditionalities. And those conditionalities essentially kept on plummeting the country as they couldn't pay things back until all of a sudden, even though Sudan is very heavy, rich and resource, and even so rich that it was once considered the breadbasket of the Middle East and of Africa, due to the many rivers running around it, due to the fertility of the soil of it. The issue is when it came to there's many different issues. One of the issues was actually before Elbashir, there was a famine in the 80s during Numeri's time, and I think Mahdi's time as well. No, it was Numeri's time, and that famine was in Ethiopia and in Sudan, and it was catastrophic, absolutely catastrophic. That's why there's a Michael Jackson song saying "Feed the World." It was literally about that moment during that famine at that time. And Sudan has enough food to feed itself. But what happened there was the authorities were still shipping out, exporting its own food that it's grown, the wheat and the grain and everything, towards the Gulf countries and the GCC, because they were buying that up for oil money. With their oil money, they have sand, they have desert, like, no offense, and they can't grow their own stuff. So they were importing it from Sudan, to the point that even when Sudanese needed it created a famine. And even during those famine conditions, it was still going to them. Anyway, so now we're dealing in the 90s. People are recovering from the famine. People want hope and everything. In comes in this Enqaz government, or the savior government, as Umar al-Bashir and the Islamists during the time. So Umar al-Bashir and the Islamists came together to form it. When I say the Islamists, I mean the National Islamic Front, which was formed in the 70s in Sudan. Oh, no, 50s, much earlier actually, maybe 60s. And they teamed up, as I said earlier, with the Numeri, the military man, and the ideology. So somebody comes in and a military man comes in and says, hey, I need an ideology here for the masses. And the ideology in this case was Islamism, and many would say Muslim Brotherhood, but its own Sudanese style. Then oil was found and discovered, and in came in the money. Essentially, revenue went up, and the Sudanese state actually started to make a surplus in the economy. I believe it was 6% and then some. However, that wouldn't last for long. So as the money was coming in, that money was being reinvested back into the security apparatus of the state, rather than the healthcare, to the education, to the civil society functions of the state. And because of that, it's led to a lot of upheaval and a lot of resentment for one part. Now, this small economic boom won't last forever. And the oil fields that they found this in was actually in South Sudan. And for those who don't know, during Sudan's entire existence since 1956, it's only seen 11 years of peace. Do you understand? Like, from 1956 till 2025, only 11 years of peace. Why? Because the Sudanese government has been waging war with the different non-Arab communities of Sudan. And this is a whole nother aspect, which is essentially the Arabization of Sudan. Sudan is a country with over 200 languages and more than 500 tribes or something, and different cultures. And to bring them all together into one national unity and spirit called Sudan was extremely difficult, as post-independence, the power of Sudan was centered in Khartoum, in the middle of the country, and in the peripheries, like Darfur, like Nuba Mountains, like South Sudan, there were non-Arab communities there, and the Khartoum elite basically said, hey, you're not like us. We're not going to care about you. We're not going to invest into you. And it created resentment over the decades. And before I come back to the main timeline of what I'm talking about, since independence, or actually just 1 year before it, 1955 until sometime in the 70s, there was the first Sudanese civil war, which lasted for like 20 years or 22 years. And then there was the second Sudanese civil war that lasted from the 1980s up until 2005, which again lasted for another 20 years. And at the same time, we had the Darfur genocide from 2003, which never really stopped. And we'll come back into that one later. So the two civil wars there of South Sudan, along with finding the oil fields in South Sudan, you can imagine what's going to happen next, right? So the central government was more or less like, well, you're technically part of Sudan, and that oil belongs to us. Whereas the South Sudanese were more like, no, you're killing our people, marginalizing us from government and from power, and you want to use our resources. There's no way. Whilst you're pushing an agenda of trying to Arabize everyone and make everybody Islamic. So there wasn't that plurality in society there. Or rather, there wasn't that much anymore. It was being eroded away. And then eventually, because of these civil wars, it culminated in 2005 with something called the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, which essentially meant Southern Sudan was going to split into South Sudan in 2011. So now keep this in mind, 2011, that's when the oil money is going to go. That's when the resource for that oil is going to go. So Sudan is about to go back way into that step of when it had no oil and had to rely on agricultural kind of resources to make its money. Not only agricultural, gold, a bit of uranium, actually, if you want to go into that, and then some. But mostly the agricultural fertility of the nation. So, as I said, in the 1990s, it got a bit of a boom, and then suddenly, I don't know how, but Osama bin Laden ended up in Sudan. And because of that, they suspected that Osama bin Laden planned a few attacks on US embassies from Sudan. Thus, Sudan now has to end up in the terrorist state-sponsored list, the state-sponsored terrorist list. So put into international sanctions that closed Sudan off from the free market economy, and essentially said, you are on your own. Something similar to like Iran. Now we can go into multiple conspiracies behind that, and I'm sure we're having a great conversation for another time, but let's stick to the facts. The issue here was you have Sudan now closed off from the international community. It can't access the funds, the international funds, to be able to help it, nor will it be able to access much of the resources around the world and even the international markets, thus limiting Sudan to having a few peculiar allies such as Russia, China, Iran, the ones that the West didn't like, essentially, and we were part of that equation. And so it's that equation, however, was not going to be consistent, or rather, it wasn't one that was that can last for a long time, due to the drop in economic output and performance. So as people got more dissatisfied, they absolutely wanted to get rid of the government and have somebody else there. I hope I will explain all the other points. Trust me, it's a long timeline, but it all does weave together. So they've tried it a few times. That it didn't work. They tried it in 2012 and 2013, did not work. 2011, just Sudan and South Sudan split, so all the economy is gone. and the Sudanese government wasn't good at mitigating the damage of that economic loss. So instead, what you do, strengthen the security apparatus. So whoever says something, you just put them down immediately, so they don't say a word on the matter. And so it was just more repression and more oppression towards the people of Sudan. And eventually, this did lead to the Sudanese Revolution of 2019. Now, pause, stop. Darfur, 2003. What happened there, and how did that link to 2019? So, as I said, because of the 1980s, what happened in terms of arming these just simple farmers and and herders and cow herders, it led towards infighting, and essentially in the 2000s, early 2000s, it saw a massive influx of non-Arab communities coming in from the Sahel belt, entering towards Darfur area. The Arab tribes of Darfur essentially said to the central government in Khartoum, run by Bashir and the Islamists, saying, dude, we have all these non-Sudanese coming in, they're going to take our land, what do we do about it? And the Sudanese army was like, no worries, this is how we operate. You're going to be a militia, we're going to give you all the weapons, and we're going to join you in that. So the Sudanese army essentially created something called the Janjaweed, which basically means demons or devils on horsebacks. And in 2003 to like onwards, that's when, if you remember, I believe more of the same generation, if you remember, during those times, you saw George Clooney all over the news. You saw all these celebrities talking about the genocide happening in Darfur. And that's the crazy part. It was the army and the Janjaweed together, both of them together, that committed this genocide against the non-Arab communities in Darfur. And it's those very same people who are the ones now fighting at each other in all over Sudan. And so what happened in Darfur and Al-Fashir did not happen in a vacuum. This comes from a continuation of what happened back in 2003 when they were together. They were together in this. They were together and committing genocide and ethnic cleansing against non-Arab communities. That never saw justice. That didn't see accountability. The closest thing was the International Criminal Court essentially indicting Omar al-Bashir and the commanders and those involved during that time. And just last month, after what year are we in? We're in 2025. Just last month, Anu Kashape, one of those who was directing the onslaught, that massacre, I won't even call it a war because there was no opposition to them for them to be called a war. It's an ethnic cleansing. Anu Kashape, who handed himself over to the ICC just a few years earlier, was finally trialed and charged for genocide and ethnic cleansing and war crimes and crimes against humanity at the International Criminal Court. Now, we can say that the ICC is a neo-imperial instrument against many different states, and it's used by superpowers. But in this case, due to the lack of accountability and the rule of law in Sudan and the corruption of the national government itself, to not being able to bring that justice towards the Darfuris who died and were killed, and the ICC essentially took over that. But that took 22 years for justice to be seen. Does that mean now in 2025, or rather the war started in 2023, does that mean it's going to take another 22 years just to see justice done for those who went through genocide and ethnic cleansing? It's horrible. Now, so that ethnic cleansing from 2003 continued. And essentially, what happened was the Janjaweed, the devils on horseback, these militias essentially become legitimized by the state, by Omar al-Bashir, and more or less became the Rapid Support Forces. That's which we know them as of today. So that's how it started. 1980s, farmers, pastoralists fighting about over land because of invading communities or indigenous communities or something. 2000s, the more of it came in, and the Sudanese government essentially created a militia. And then in the 2010s, after doing their job, the militia was upgraded and legitimized into a paramilitary force known as the Rapid Support Forces. It's a very simplified version of the history, and because of that, the Rapid Support Forces and the Sudanese Armed Forces, the army, have been oppressing ethnic minorities in Sudan, from Darfur to a place called Nuba Mountains, to a place called Blue Nile State. Anyone with darker skin, right, that they or was not Muslim by their eyes, or Islamic by their standards, were the ones who were acceptable to shoot and kill. And that's why there was that two long civil wars and everything like that. So now we come to 2019. So economic sanctions from the terrorist sanctions, years of genocide and ethnic cleansings, the increase in the security apparatus of the Sudanese state, the marginalization of ethnic minorities, the stripping away of rights, the way that the Sudanese government treated women, treated money, the way they couldn't mitigate the loss of the economy. They lost South Sudan, and we can go into much more. That all culminated in 2019 with the Sudanese revolution.
And I would like to come back to 2019 in a second, because I think there's a lot to talk about also in terms of hope and so on. So before we come back to 2019, I also want to talk about the resistance committees and so on that were very active around then. Before we come to that, firstly, that was really incredible context about the history and how Sudan got to where it is today. And I know that there's feelings around calling it the kind of the forgotten humanitarian crisis. I think, obviously language is important. And also it's interesting it's actually not that interesting to realize that once again, the age-old, kind of motivation of resource extraction is at play here. So we can see this. And in terms of, the rebranding of the Janjaweed to the RSF, is also intertwined with that resource extraction, it seems. And so what I wanted to come to is your work tracking the war economy and, external sponsorships reveals the international dimension of Sudan's conflict. And you've spoken a bit about the history of that, which I think for many will be really crucial context, because I think it's still not very widely known or understood. And many people point to the United Arab Emirates as a key arms supplier to the RSF, while Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Qatar, Ethiopia, Egypt all play different kinds of roles. And even Elon Musk's Starlink has seemingly become Sudan's primary internet access, giving him unprecedented control of the way people in Sudan communicate, I suppose, with each other, but also with the outside world. From your analysis of financial flows, arms supplies, are we witnessing a proxy war funded and fueled by external actors? What does your tracking reveal about who profits while seemingly sadly Sudan burns?
This is beyond a proxy war now. This is way beyond that. This is a global mini world war happening inside one country. This isn't just arms and weapons and resource equipment, weapon equipment, military equipment being sent into the country. We're seeing mercenaries from far as Colombia. We're seeing, and they're being smuggled through Somalia. We're seeing um, weapons coming in from China, from Russia. We're seeing diplomatic covering from America. We're all these countries that you've mentioned, there's strategic interests within that. Now, the Colombians, in that sense, those are mercenaries. The Colombian government does not sponsor mercenaries. But with regards to the United Arab Emirates, these were the very same people that were working with Umar Hassan al-Bashir. These were the ones working with General Bashir. So when they say now there's a narrative building that they're against the Muslim Brotherhood, it's codswallop. These were the same ones that were working together with Umar al-Bashir to resource extract. Now, the United Arab Emirates has multiple problems, and one of it is they can't grow their food because they're a small little country, nor can they have access to clean water or fresh water. Heck, a few years ago, even came out on an article that these guys wanted to tow an iceberg from Antarctica all the way to the shores of the UAE so they can get that water. And so what Sudan offers is the answer towards their issues, which is all the resources for them to be able to sustain itself. But the UAE plays such a unique role in not only in the Sudan war, but in terms of its positioning around the world. It's one of the only countries I've realized that can play the West and play the East so well because of its strategy, of its positioning, and of its connections. The UAE, okay, the gold that is being smuggled out of Sudan, right, during the war and just before, by the Rapid Support Forces. So the Rapid Support Forces will take the gold during the time when they were in government, basically, before the war started. It wasn't classified as smuggling because they are the government. And then that would go to the UAE. The UAE would send that gold to Russia. So when Ukraine invaded Russia and then the international community placed sanctions on Russia, how come the Russian economy didn't tank? It's because of the gold that was sent to them by the UAE, which came from Sudan. And during that time in Sudan, Wagner, the paramilitary militia force of the Russians, were there doing the extractions with the RSF. So you have Wagner, you have the UAE, you have Russia, the RSF. Okay, you got these. Then again, we know the United Arab Emirates is part of the Zionist axis. It's with the Israelis. So they're doing the bidding of Israel, and I haven't even gone into Israel. Oh my lord, that's another point. The UAE is doing the bidding because after signing the Abraham Accords, and essentially they were bought out, I believe, in 2006 because they were having a crisis there in the UAE. They wanted to essentially get rid of whoever was there and have their own person in charge, and that's Hemeti. And he would offer them the best deals, better than Omar al-Bashir and better whatever generals at the time. There are those who have the national interests of Sudan in mind, the generals who have the national interests of Sudan in mind. And then you have militia leaders who can do anything that they want to, and they will give you whatever because they don't have national interests in mind, thus giving you the best business deals. The UAE, when I landed in Port Sudan, actually, then level one is RSF smuggles gold, sells gold at an undercut price, blood gold, to the UAE. Level two is realizing that the Sudanese government or the Sudanese armed forces was also involved in selling the gold to the UAE. In the 2024 report of the Sudanese government showing that imports and exports, the business report essentially, the biggest export the Sudanese government had was the gold mines. And 1.4 billion was recorded to going to the UAE. Now, how does that make sense? How does that make sense? You're the Sudanese army. You're fighting against the rapid support forces who is taking your gold and selling it to the UAE. And now you're telling me that these people themselves have also been selling that same gold from their mines to the UAE. What the hell? So is the UAE doing both at the same time? My theory is, and I think it's actually a fact, because just a few days ago it came out with some breaking news. The UAE is doing multiple attacks through different ways, not just through warfare, standard warfare and conventional warfare and militias or whatever, but through economic warfare as well. They've managed to twist the arms of all gold competitors throughout the market globally, and say to them, they bought them out. They said to the competitors, do not buy gold from the Sudanese armed forces. We will pay you whatever for that, all right? The loss in that that you would usually get. The gold that was smuggled amounted to 1.4 billion. The gold division, the investigation division within the gold sector of Sudan's government, found that 53 tons of gold that they sold to the UAE actually amounted to $6 billion. So it was supposed to be $6 billion in revenue. It got cut to $1.4 billion in revenue. So what happened to the $4.5 billion deficit there? So what's going on there? So basically, it seems as if they were cutting both sides. They were twisting the arm of the Sudanese government by making sure they don't have an economic or any other competitor, no other person for them to sell their gold to get revenue to buy more weapons against them, whilst also undercutting the value of gold within the region, within the country, by taking gold out quite literally by force through the rapid support forces, which they were trading with weapons.
So can it be said that the famous gold mine in Dubai, the gold that is being sold there, is basically Sudanese blood gold? Can we say that?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can. If you go to the souk and if you buy your gold there, it's stained with Sudanese blood. If there were blood diamonds, there is blood gold, and that's what they do. And they actually have, I believe, one of the world's best refinery of gold for that. So whether or not you sell that gold to that country or to this country or to whatever competitor, they're going to come back to Dubai anyway to refine that gold into the purest quality.
It seems also in other ways that the UAE's livelihood, whether it's through its access to food and water, is dependent on the subjugation of Sudan, which in material terms probably means that its continued state of war. That the UAE, and perhaps, there's many obviously states that you've spoken about with their involvement. I think that, we could have a whole nother conversation about the role of Wagner in Africa as a whole. There seems to be a lot of that. But what I also want to talk about is, as many people who would have heard about what's been happening in Sudan would have probably seen the 2019 revolutionary images of what many called the Kandake, so like which is also known as like the Queen Mother of the ancient kingdom of Kush, which I suppose for many was also, because you were talking about one of the biggest issues in Sudan being the kind of Arabization and Islamization. So perhaps for a lot of people that reference was also, this is the real roots of Sudan. So this became a big, a global symbol of resistance, particularly because it was, women at the forefront, chanting, chants of revolution, but also while doing that, being involved in actively in shaping and developing the vision for a future Sudan. We're also hearing now the harrowing reports of systematic sexual violence being used as a weapon of war. And sadly, once again, it's an age-old reality, particularly for women, but also we're seeing, more and more people speak out about, obviously, sexual violence being used as a weapon of war, not just against women, but actually against men and children as well. And, you've done a lot of documenting, particularly of humanitarian work, but also of some of these realities. How should we understand both realities? Like, women must still be resisting. I can't, like, that 2018, 2019 reality would not have gone away. So, we spoke a little bit about it at the start of our conversation, but what was the vision of the resistance committees? Where is that vision now? And what do people in Sudan, of course, while trying to survive, totally understandable reality, but how do they feel about the future of Sudan after having that, revolutionary experience in 2018, 2019?
That question I'll come to at the end, but to come back a bit, which will answer your previous questions. So, if as I said, during the economic hardships under Elbashir and the Islamist government, how did these people survive? And it was through community. The Sudanese people understand community very well, and they understand helping each other. Due to the economic hardships, what's the point of me having a Lamborghini if the road is still broken and everybody is still traveling on the same road with donkeys, right? There's no point being in a SUV with an air conditioner if everybody else is still going on the same broken road. And that's those who were in those SUVs and aircons are definitely those who benefited from the regime. But the majority of people understood that through community kitchens, through initiatives to help each other, grassroots organizing, the state wasn't helping them. They had to do it themselves. So they set up all these grassroots initiatives to get their voice out, to support those most in need. And that was happening during the Bashir era. And even way before that, it's a Sudanese thing of community, of coming together. And the Sudanese revolution was a massive hallmark of that, and it was the women who definitely pushed for that because of their maternal nature, whereas us guys, us men, were essentially being militarized and learning how to pick up the weapon. It was the Sudanese women who said, no, we do not need to go down that path. We need to look after our communities and support those most in need. And due to those practices, that's what made the Sudanese revolution so successful at the time, is because it brought everybody together in a sense of unity, that we share all of this in a grassroots way, decentralized, without having a person or hierarchy on top of us. And that is a massive threat to the global international capitalist system. If everybody started to think like the Sudanese people did, that would be such that would collapse the international capitalist system and the neoliberal order. And as such, they could not allow that to happen. That's why the world was yay about it, but the ones in charge, they were shaking in their boots, because what happened in Sudan could happen in the neighboring nations as well. Don't forget the Arab Spring in the early 2010s, and how that scared autocratic Arab regimes as well, and the monarchies. They did not want to see a repeat of that again, and they saw the Sudanese revolution. There's two different thoughts. Some people saw a Sudanese revolution as the continuation of the Arab Spring. And others would say the Sudanese revolution was the beginning of an African summer. And because of that, they were too scared to go down that road. So eventually, once Omar Bashir was disposed, the international communities did not focus on the resistance committees. Let me come back. The resistance committees came because of the very nature of the Sudanese trying to survive under those very harsh and autocratic environments. And whatever the government would try to do, which would put the people down, as I said earlier, due to the growing security apparatus, it was the resistance committees were formed in neighborhoods. They're just neighborhood boys and girls. That's it. They're ordinary people. It's those ordinary people that have taken their demands to power, and it terrified those in charge, because they couldn't do anything about it, and they had to quickly make their calls towards their hierarchical bosses to try and stabilize the situation. Even the political parties in Sudan were not to be trusted, as essentially they were bought up by the regime and they fit within the model of the governance then to essentially keep things under control. Imagine it as a farm for the global order, and the global order does not want the farm workers to revolt against them, because that will just bring down everybody's business. So in this kind of case, the Kandakas, the Sudanese women, they were absolutely against that. It was an intrinsic thing. If you were there in Sudan and you saw it, you had no other choice but to help others around you. As I mentioned earlier, you want to help. If you want to help yourself, you got to help others, and that way we can all go forward together. That became a threat, and culminated in 2019 due to the economic conditions. There was a time when people were lining up long queues just to get bread, or long queues just to get fuel. How could that be when Sudan was the economic breadbasket of the world due to its agricultural lands? How is it that the very ones whose soil can grow food for the rest of the world be the ones in hunger? It didn't make sense. And so the revolution happened. But the sanctions internationally as well, they created a pressure cooker effect. And you can say that the Sudanese government were on the elitist peripheries of the neoliberal order, and if empire always starts showing its cracks from the peripheries, and it was during that time. So 2019 came. The way that people were surviving during a time of transitioning from one government to another was through those community kitchens, was through the doctors giving free aid to everybody that they could, was due to the engineers doing their best to build up homes for the homeless. So essentially all these professions would come together, and it was the Sudanese Professional Association and unions essentially that was very workers focused and orientated. That didn't last for long, as after Umar Bashir was disposed by the people, primarily the people, and then the Sudanese Armed Forces and the Rapid Support Forces, the way these two got involved with each other was Umar Bashir made a call to Hemeti in Darfur saying, I need your troops to come into Khartoum, because view the RSF as Bashir's personal army. Even though he was a colonel when he came in under the Sudanese Armed Forces, he knew that Sudanese history showed that there will be a coup, there will be a revolution against him. So to maintain power and to ensure his stability, he created this private militia, this paramilitary force. So they came in and he gave the order to them of essentially wiping out the protesters, which some would say they denied. Hemeti denied in the beginning. He then teamed up with the army. Both of them agreed, we need to get rid of this guy. When they got rid of him, they then said, okay, now it's going to be us in charge. The people said, no, we don't want military rule anymore. We need civilian rule. And then in came in this shady group of people who claimed to represent the Sudanese people. They came out of nowhere, called the Freedom of Forces of Change. Not actually nowhere. There is history of multiple organizations and stuff. Though they may have started off with good intentions, they were certainly bought out by the international order. And there was multiple attempts to put this together, and essentially it created a transitional government where the militaries and the militia said, okay, we will hold it for now, and then we will transition into a civilian rule government. That civilian aspect was led by a man named Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok, who was a UN economist, a very successful one, and he knew how to operate in systems. However, in Sudan, what was needed wasn't a person who operated in systems, but a person who, or group of people who knew how to create systems, and that's what the Kandakas did. That's what the resistance committees did. They've created new systems, not operating over previous systems. But I'm saying this now in hindsight because the feelings of joy and jubilation during those times were ecstatically high. There was a lot of happiness and joy. Then came in the transitional period, and in came in the policies by Hamdok, such as, which was very similar to IMF ones, such as cutting the government subsidies of certain goods, from farming to fuel, to all of these. So the government, even though it had no money left due to the previous regime and the lack of money coming in, they essentially implemented IMF policy, which was not great for the whole nation. And then in 2021, the transition was supposed to happen from the military to civilian rule, even though as shady as Hamdok, as I just mentioned, and his policies, people saw that as a better option than whatever the militaries were doing. They didn't know any other reality, other than military rule. So even if this guy came in as a civilian, but still, being a puppet for the international order, it was still better than the military rule of it, which led to multiple civil wars and a splitting of a country. So the way it culminated in 2021 on the 25th of October. It was that time when they were supposed to transition to military rule. The army and the RSF came together, essentially arresting Hamdok, the prime minister, and it was a coup d'etat where they regained control of the nation, and they made it purely militarily. I was out on those streets with my gas mask, eating tear gas, fighting against the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces who were killing protesters on site during those horrible times. And Sudanese civilians was telling the international world, stop listening to the military men, stop legitimizing them, listen to the Sudanese civilians and to the people, do not legitimize them. But alas, the UN, doing what it does best of not listening to the people and listening to those in charge, did exactly that. They listened to the military. They sidelined the Sudanese people after such a beautiful revolution as well.
And it seems even today, as you said at this earlier on, the kind of diplomatic cover of the RSF, which is now the dominant force in Sudan, continues with RSF officials, army officials, but also kind of like government officials in Washington, D.C., actually, smiling and seeming quite comfortable and relaxed when confronted by Sudanese people. And it, hearing what you have to say about, the kind of revolutionary movement that was happening in Sudan and what has happened in terms of, transitional governments and so on, it does really seem like a big warning, for example, to the people in Syria who are experiencing actually kind of a similar thing. And, there would be a lot to talk about that. Obviously, we're not talking about Syria today, but I think Sudan is actually a big warning of how uprisings and revolutions could go. And it has a lot of examples of what to do and perhaps also what not to do. So, yeah, I think it's really, really important. And as you said, you were in Sudan in 2023. You helped coordinate evacuations. Did you want to say something?
Actually, during the revolution in 2019, there was graffiti all over the walls and art. And one of them, striking one, was how there's unity between the Sudanese revolution and the Syrian revolution, and what the people demanded, and what the people wished they wanted. The Syrians wanted to get rid of Bashar al-Assad just as much as the Sudanese people wanted to get rid of Umar al-Bashir. And now there's an Elbashir Idris telling you about it and such. I think the name Bashir is the last thing that anybody wants to hear in these kind of cases. But it was a beautiful moment. Not even moment, it's still there. And that solidarity, that transnational solidarity, that revolutionary spirit was certainly there. And I was in Sudan I was actually in Sudan I was teaching English in a place called Ahfad University, which is a university for women. I just finished in 2018. I got my degree, finished. I decided, screw the UK. I just wanted to go back to Sudan and see what's up. I haven't been in 5 years. Went over there, ended up myself as teaching English, and and I was there the month before the revolution kicked off in December, a month or two. And I remember so vividly, I had a classroom full of young ladies, and we were teaching English, and one of them said to me, and fat girls, oh my God. Like, yeah, I have never seen such spirit from anyone except for these Sudanese women. I was in the middle of the class. I was teaching them. One of them raised their hands and they said, "Sir, I need to go out, and I'll be right back." I said, "Yeah, all right, cool." One by one, my students were leaving, and 5 minutes later, I found them in the courtyard. I was on the fourth floor of this tower block, and I was looking up the balcony, and my students are there, and they're protesting. And I was like, dude, I'm just a guest teacher. I don't know what the procedure is. And before you know it, riot police came with their shields and batons and tear gas. And these girls were fighting them. They were fighting them physically, fighting against the police on the doors of Afed, so they don't enter into this sacred ground for safe space for women. And I was in shock. And that was just before the revolution actually kick-started and went off. And so that spirit, I've seen it with my own eyes. And then I stayed until February in 2019, came back to the UK, started lobbying here in British Parliament to recognize the efforts of the Sudanese civilians. That eventually worked out. But in hindsight, after everything I've mentioned, I didn't realize it was all part of a bigger regime change kind of thing. But at least rights were being given towards the women and towards the marginalized and towards those who were voiceless. But it was short-lived, unfortunately. And in 2023, when the war broke out, the resistance committees, I was here in the UK when it started, and the resistance committees came to me, said, "Bashir, please, can you look into those with foreign passports, see if you can evacuate them, because we are up to our necks, we're over capacity, just looking out for normal Sudanese people to try and get them to safety. We have the non-Sudanese or foreign passport holders that we can't look after." And essentially, I was given the task of that. And me and a couple of friends, we created a WhatsApp group and community that essentially did the logistics for the Sudanese or for the passport holders to move them from Khartoum to a place called Wadi Signa Air Base. And to evacuate them. The numbers of people, you can say, that was transported from Khartoum to Wadi Sidna Air Base, from our side at least, of the foreign passport holders, I would want to say over 1,000. And then there was more. During these groups, we would offer safe routes we had people on both sides, in the army and in the RSF. They would say, okay, this checkpoint, don't go over there. This street is a battle zone, don't go there, go through over here. And it wasn't just me, it was a group effort with everybody, not just my WhatsApp group or community, but like it's decentralized, no hierarchy, information, open source, getting it from multiple sources, corroborating them to make sure safety was there. And a few, it was terrifying, because now you're responsible for the lives of so many. And if there's one wrong move, one wrong information, that means the death of people. It means the kidnapping of others. And some of the scariest moments I had to deal with was, and my team had to deal with, was, bless you, Mustafa, bless you so much. He had a call that one of the buses that he arranged to move people was stopped at an RSF checkpoint, and there were young boys in that bus. And during that time, the RSF were snatching any young person, and forcing them into the RSF, giving them a weapon, giving them that khaki, to essentially fight on their side. They're just young boys. They're little kids. They don't know anything, man. They're innocent, and to plunge them into that war economy. And our team had to be on the phones with the civilians on those bus, and even talk to those soldiers and beg them, please leave them alone, don't take them, don't snatch them, just let the bus continue on its journey of safety towards that airbase. Even if they didn't have foreign passports, it would be easier to get them out of the city, just push them there. And even if they didn't have passports itself, the British government conducted the longest evacuation operation since the end of World War II in Khartoum in 2023. So some people managed to get onto these evacuation planes even if they had no passport, no nothing. It's sanctity and protection of life. This is the most important thing. No amount of document is going to get in the way of such a horrible catastrophe. Wars do not usually, 99% of wars do not start within the capital city with the first gunshot being ringing from the presidential palace or within the capital city. They start in the peripheries and then they move into the capital. But when you have a war starting from the capital itself, and Khartoum is home to 11 million people, they would say 2 million, but unofficially, even up to 11 million. Trying to evacuate those was disastrous. So I found it as a personal responsibility onto myself that I had to enter Sudan and make sure that these lives were protected and they could evacuate, and to give them reassurance. And so after the Wadi Sedna operation closed, the civilians were instructed to move towards Port Sudan, which is all the way on the eastern side of the country, which is a very long trek. And with the war economy, prices were going high, so people couldn't even afford it. And of course, you're going to get merchants and traders who would take advantage and boost prices, hike prices up. And so those who did manage to make it to Port Sudan, I went into the country, stayed there for a month to visit them, to see them, and try to offer some sort of way for them to get onto a boat or boats set up by governments, so they can get onto those boats so they can evacuate to Saudi Arabia, and then from there catch a flight to whatever country is next.
It seems like with what's happening now more recently in Elbashir in Darfur, there's going to be another wave of this, and this is considering at the same time, particularly across Europe, but actually across the West, migrants and refugees are scapegoated as the main issue that Europe has. So when there's wars that are aided and abetted and, given diplomatic cover by the West, of course, there's millions of people who are displaced, but then those people are met, not by everyone, of course, but met in terms of the mainstream narrative as the main problem of Europe. So, how do you see this, and what can we expect with the, October 2025 reality that has happened in Elbashir in Darfur?
Well, the Europeans may say that, but it was the EU itself who created something called the Khartoum process in 2013, where essentially to curb migration coming into Europe from Sub-Sahara and from Africa. And since the fall of Gaddafi at that time, which led to the rise of slave markets and smuggling towards Europe, what the EU did was they actually funded the Sudanese regime. They funded the rapid support forces with weapons for security border reasons, which was essentially, I'm going to give but deadly paramilitary weapons, or they are, and they will do what they see as fit towards migrants trying to cross over to the borders into Libya and such. And if you look on the map, you've got Darfur, which is bordering with Chad, and just on the top northwest, you have the Libya border. So people would cross through there to get into Libya, not knowing the realities of the slave markets there. And as I've mentioned earlier, the RSF, the Janjaweed, were targeting non-Arab ethnicities, and so and EU did not want Africans to come in, and so it made sense for the EU to essentially fund a militia that was already killing Africans in the first place, to continue killing them so they don't reach the Mediterranean coast, so they don't cross into Fortress Europe, so to speak, and have that continued overflow of migration. So as much as the West was scapegoating migrants, they were the ones primarily funding the militia forces that these people were running away from, which is absolute madness. But that's what was happening, and it's an EU policy. I'm not sure if it continues on now, but the Khartoum process was certainly instrumental towards the rise in migration. Certainly, and then they scapegoated migrants, which, as I said, doesn't make sense. Now, coming to Elbashir, what happened there, the horrible images that have been confirmed from space. Have you ever seen pools of blood as wide as people's homes from satellite? No one has. And the reports from the ground and the videos that the RSF would they themselves upload as trophies of killing these people. And Elbashir it didn't start in Elbashir. When the war started, okay, we can go back as 20 years ago, I explained that. But then when Elbashir is Al Janina Part 2. What happened in 2023? There was another city in Darfur called Al Janina. They were resisting against the rapid support forces. They came into the city. They massacred everybody, and in the space of a few weeks, I believe, they killed 10 to 15,000 people as well. They massacred them, and the videos there were too gruesome for me to describe right now. And so what happened in Elbashir was a continuation of that same modus operandi of terrorist, of genocidal, of ethnic cleansing intent and action. And we've been trying to speak about this. We've been honestly trying so much to get the voice and the message out there, but the world, it's not that it's forgotten. No, it's deliberately ignored by the international community, by the media, by everybody else, and given what happened also in Gaza as well, and the catastrophes and the genocide happening there, it was difficult for the human psyche. It's difficult for the human psyche to be able to absorb all of this violence and to understand it and to try and disseminate it, especially when you're living in the West, when everybody rather, be an ostrich and just stick their head into the sand rather than face the realities of how they're able to even live the luxury that we get to live at the moment. And the situation in Elbashir currently, a top RSF commander has spoken to journalist Yusra Al-Bagir of Sky News, saying that in the first 5 days they've massacred 7,000 people, and I still think that's a gross underestimate of what they've done. They've created an earth beam, a 75-kilometer earth beam around the city, making sure that there was no resources or supplies to go into the city for the civilians there. Though the city was defended by a joint force of surprisingly the same rebels who were going against Umar Bashir, are now the same ones who joined up with the army to go against the militia, the rapid support forces, the Janjaweed. They held up for a long time, but due to leadership incompetence from the army, due to the lack of supplies coming in, these people were literally being starved to their bones, eating peanut shellings, eating mud, eating poison animal feed. They've gone through over 500 days of hell, of over 18 months of siege. It couldn't last. It could not last. And that earth being that they created was as such that nothing goes in, but importantly, nobody leaves the city. So you've gone through a siege. You haven't eaten correctly in 18 months. You don't even have the energy. If you have left, God knows how you even made it there, with no energy at all, underneath the bearing Sudanese sun and heat, towards a locality called Tawila, which is 50 kilometers away, and people had to walk all the way there. And those were the lucky ones who had the confidence to walk there. Though also this comes from the incompetence of the military leadership, as a deal was struck to essentially let the army leave, but it left the civilians there. And the diplomatic covering here, and a repeated pattern we always see, is that whenever there is negotiations in terms of ending the war in Sudan, the RSF always strikes at the artery of the nation and of the civilians. The fall of Elbashir happened in tandem with peace talks happening in Washington, D.C. between the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces. And then that's when they striked. When there was a city called Wad Madani in a state called Jazeera, which was taken by the rapid support forces in 2023 in December. That happened in tandem with the peace talks happening in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia during that time. There were peace talks happening in Switzerland and in 2024 between the US and all these other countries and the belligerents. And once again, the rapid support forces made another strike targeting another settlement civilization at that time, or city at that time. And so the pattern here is talk and strike. Whenever there is talks, at the same time the RSF strikes. Though, yes, historically, I have mentioned to you that the Sudanese armed forces has been the main sponsor of violence in Sudan during that time, due to the monopoly of violence that they had. They are now the ones who are on the back foot, and during the start of the war, the ones who are of that Islamist regime, of the previous regime, who were embedded within the army, they were essentially killed off, not to excuse the Islamists that brought about this mess due to their horrible ideology, but essentially you can't leave. The army had been basically almost at 1% battery of health, you can say, and it was normal. It's normal, ordinary people who essentially had to learn how to pick up arms to defend themselves, and they have to become the new army, so to speak. Because resistance is a human right, and especially when it comes from a militia that seeks to destroy and does not know how to govern. And in any area, you can see this pattern in any area that the RSF has taken. They do not know how to govern. They only terrorize and seek to cause more damage and terror there. And so they're not fit for governance at all.
Thank you very much, Elbashir. I mean, this is such a broad area to discuss, and I'm sure we'll have more discussions about this. And, you know, considering the kind of international community, particularly in terms of mainstream media and the ignoring of the realities in Sudan, we will continue to platform these discussions. Thank you so much for this conversation. And yeah, that's it for today's episode of the Amargi. We're a grassroots funded project, so your support really helps us keep going. Follow us at theamargi.com and on our socials to stay connected.